Hello and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. I'm your host, Brian Phillips. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and across the desk from me is our Chief of Research, Derek Cohen. Well, Derek, we are in the middle of the special session, and what can be said, what hasn't been said about the special session that already has been said by the entire country?
Yes.
Up to this point.
Well, I was about to say, I'm sure we're gonna get into that here soon enough, but everyone thinks like, oh, with the events going on, it must mean that your job is relatively light and it's a whole bunch of no easy days, right?
Yeah, I mean, usually I'm always piqued my interest when I see anything in national news about what's going on in Texas. And it's always something, okay, can we weigh in? And I talk, but it's just, every day it's just the political punditry back and forth and everything that's going on. So I guess it's cool that Texas is in the news, but maybe we would hope it would be for different reasons, I suppose. All right, well, let's jump into the fun part of the show. Let's get the hot take going. I thought, it's kind of funny. We always talk about on the show about how Trump, really has the pulse of the people and will do things or make pronouncements or executive orders or something that, really get to, it seemed kind of esoteric and almost silly at first, but then but when you really look at it, it gets to the heart of what the average person cares about. What was the one on the speed of your water or water pressure or whatever? We had an EO on that, stuff like that.
I would point back to, was it when LSU won the national championship during the first term and he had the McDonald's spread?
Yeah, exactly. Stuff like that at first, the media freaks out about it, but then you start looking at it and you're like, that's actually pretty cool. Well, he was seen on top of the White House this week, which again was, one of those things where the media was like, what are you doing? What's his agenda? Why is he up there? And it's like the average person looks at that and goes, yeah, I would do that. If I was president and that was my house, why not go up there and take a view of, the ellipse in the National Mall from up there? So it just got me thinking about, presidential privilege, shall we say, certain things that the president can do that the rest of us can't. And I was curious if you had if there was something that you thought, as president, and during your time as president, not just afterwards or whatever, but during your time as president, what was something that you would try to do that most people wouldn't be able to do?
So when when I saw you pose this, I started thinking it'd be really cool. We need to have an in-person inspection of the space station or, something along those lines. And then I thought, President Trump's actually already done something that I would have done if I were president in a cheeky context. I don't know if you remember, they had over the summer. I know you're a big soccer guy. So they had the FIFA Club World Cup, which was in some of the most expensive ACLs in the world playing on at the Meadowlands, which, that's a whole another interesting thing. But they had that. And it is customary for political leaders of a country to present the champion of a host country to present the people who win the tournament with the trophy or the prize. And Trump, I think it was Chelsea from the English Premier League, and he gets there on stage and gives it to them. And then the guy, I can't remember the guy's name, but the head of FIFA was like, okay, let's walk off the side and let them celebrate. Trump just stood there. And so stood there and celebrated with the team. Cole Palmer's looking at him like what's he doing? And they're all doing the thing. And he's doing that. And that's probably what I would end up doing. Just kind of just forcing myself into such celebrations. I mean, it would work in the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
I guess if you're having them, coming by the house, it'd be a different thing. But
I guess forcing your way into events that you would normally not be able to come to is kind of cool. Having those celebrations that they have at the White House with the championship teams and getting to clown around with some of the players. I would probably, after president, I would probably, that's what I was thinking, playing Augusta National or something like that. But you probably couldn't do that necessarily as president. You could do it afterwards. But the coolest part of being president has to be Air Force One, right? I mean, that has to be just because it's, not only is it just, your private plane and, as soon as you get, like George H.W. Bush famously said, as soon as you board, you leave, which is the coolest part about it. But just all of the bells and whistles that come with it, that has to be.
I don't know. I'm going to put that. I'm going to push Air Force One aside. I kind of like in your Augusta National idea, but you'd have to do it, for the integrity of the office.
Yeah.
You'd have to play. You go out there with Bryson or something, but you'd have to do best ball.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
And then you'd just be like, yeah, we shared the load.
Yeah. I definitely got there with Scotty, hook 'em horns. All right. Moving on to what's going on here in Texas. And obviously the number one thing going on in here in Texas is the special session and the, I guess the fight or the debate or whatever over redistricting. And, we're not going to run over all the things that have been said a million times and or even get into the maps or whatever. But I did have some questions, around this. The first thing is, I'm just thinking about it from like just a pure communication standpoint. Like, forget the politics and get the policy, but with the Democrats running off to states that are heavily gerrymandered to protest gerrymandering. I mean, that's the first one. I'm always curious if there's do you think anybody considered the optics of that before they decided to run out and run off on their duties here at Texas?
I can't speak to what they had or had not considered. I know that some of the people in leadership positions to be making such decisions are not exactly the best forward-thinking individuals, even though I'm pretty sure they just got a new party chair who is a perennially failed political candidate, which apparently is a badge of honor. But yeah, and the worst part is that this is not a new approach to it. In fact, for this one, it's literally the same thing as it was with the Killer Bees, right? Or the Killer Ds. The problem is, I think that if you saw what happened following the 2021 walkout, everything that they sought to keep from happening not only happened, much of it was dialed up to 11 then. Because people were, if I recall correctly, the voting bill, which was in 2021, the House that, trimmed it here, trimmed it there. And then I'm pretty sure SB 6 as it went was, basically as filed or very much closer to, because you want less time for the chicanery. So that being said, is if I were them, I would be very concerned that this particular stunt, I think the current map that was being circulated, the one that Mr. Hunter proposed, showed a plus R plus 5, an addition of 5 seats, and relatively safe. Because again, keep in mind, if you're going to protect your incumbents, and this is all the political discussion, if you're going to protect your incumbents, you want to have a comfortable margin. And so this made some people a little less comfortable. But overall, it's like the solid red districts are maybe still bright red, maybe just a little lesser shade, but while still drawing them out. There could, depending on how risk averse you want, you can get a map with +8. I've heard talk, I haven't seen one, but one +9 even. And I was like, you could make this basically, you can make the state look like Massachusetts, another one of the places they ran off to,
right,
wherein you had 33% of the population or 36% voting for President Trump, and 0 Republicans in their congressional delegation.
Well, I want to expand a little bit because this has sparked a national debate. I mean, it's cool that everybody's focusing on Texas, but it really has sparked a national debate on this. And so I want to go through some of the arguments that we hear all the time. The first one is that, that this is illegal or that it is unconstitutional. What do you make of that?
So interesting. I assume we're going to talk a little bit as well about the different remedies that are being sought at the moment. The question is it illegal? Is one that I think at best is yet undefined. I think that you could make a case that it is, as Governor Abbott's trying to do on the bribery side, but that's specific to the facts of this particular quorum break with the plane and all that.
No, I'm not talking about quorum break specifically. I'm talking about redistricting. Like, for example, they say, the way it's being redistricted, that's unconstitutional. The way lines are being drawn, or that it's illegal that it's happening right now instead of occurring right after a census.
Look, I will fully stipulate you can question the prudence of it. But to say that it's illegal is absolute nonsense. No. This allows, or the Constitution of Texas and the Texas statute allows us to redistrict. Basically, we must redistrict after the decennial census. We can redistrict, 4 times a particular called session if you want to add those specials on there.
Right.
But all that's completely illegal. In fact, that's sometimes what happens after you've had a court case. Maybe it was a VRA, Voters' Right Act court case, or if there was some other consideration wherein you had to do so. The only reason we do so mandatorily after the decennial sentence is because oftentimes the apportionment changes.
Right.
And that's one where it takes a lot more effort to look into.
That's that's the one that makes obviously the most sense about why it's done after the census every 10 years is because as populations change, you could have a state like Texas or Florida, which is growing in population, which actually deserves more congressional representation, whereas a state like New York or Illinois that is losing people actually deserves less. And so it makes sense to do it after that. But that's not the only time. There's nothing in the Constitution that prohibits states from doing it whenever they want to. It's
like
really
I said, you could
based
do
on
it
states.
in Texas. You could do it every session. You could do it every special session, even if you wanted to. I would question the wisdom of that kind of political capital spend. But at the very least, though, I will say, if there is one thing that you can say as a demerit to the pro-redistricting side, you're going at it with a one observation or one round of observation of new data. And I would say until we see it replicated, the 2024 election was more demonstrate trends, but it didn't demonstrate like the hold, the consistency, right? And so I think that look, you can have this, that egghead debate on that, but to suggest that it's for some reason, illegal or corrupt or anything is just, I would say, just fundamentally ignorant of the entire process of map drawing nationally.
Yeah, and to the other issue is that they bring up is, and to the Republicans' credit here in Texas, they've been very above board and said, we're doing this for partisan reasons. I mean, we're doing this because, we believe we deserve more Republican seats, which has had everybody's head explode. But and that's the thing.
Saying it like it is.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I think Democrats are pointing to and saying that that's unconstitutional. I think they're conflating, drawing lines on a race-based condition versus something, based on a partisan basis. And in fact, the Supreme Court has weighed in on that recently, right? As recent as 2019, they said, if states want to, carve it up based on on a partisan basis, there's nothing in the Constitution that prohibits that.
Right. And I would hasten to add that most blue states have already done. So that's where if you get that's why you get like Pritzker and Newsom and
Hochul.
I would say Hochul and whoever the schmo is in Massachusetts saying that they're gonna like what's Massachusetts gonna do? Like add another Dem district? Like they would have to, their apportionment would have to change because it's literally like 13 or 14 Democrats,
right,
and no Republicans. So it's one of these things where they've already have done this. And now that Texas goes, hey, I think we should do this too. And to be honest with you, not even to the degree that they're doing. I was about to say, if you want to have a conservative majority that looks like Illinois and has the East St. Louis to Springfield connection, or whatever that was, known community of interest, East St. Louis to Springfield. But you want to have that thing, don't threaten me with a good time. Go right ahead. But the problem is that all the messaging on this is either being played out in the press nationally, and I just know the people that follow this stuff tangentially, they don't care. They don't care what Texas does.
That's exactly
they
right.
don't care that people are in Massachusetts or Illinois. They do want to know about the flood stuff still, and that's a big issue that we have to get through. But at the end of the day, the Democrats are going to be the ones that are going to have to suffer the consequences, and I would probably argue that the consequences are going to get worse and worse and worse, specifically if Abbott or Paxton's approach start to take.
One of the other narratives that's kind of running through this is, how are you supposed to draw the lines? If you're not supposed to, obviously it's unconstitutional to do it by race, on a race basis. The people complain about it doing it in a partisan way because it's, creating these like majority districts, partisan districts. But and it seems like, people kind of land on like the virtuous way to draw the lines would be to create, a number of competitive districts. You want to have as many districts that are 50-50 as possible based on, the number of Republicans and Democrats. First of all, that's difficult in Texas to even think about doing that because we don't register by party here in Texas. So you don't even know who is. And obviously that's, people know kind of how certain regions vote and that's how they cut the lines or whatever. But you wouldn't be able to do it. You wouldn't have like an official, number of Republicans versus Democrats. So how would you even go about doing that? And And then the other question is, and even if you go by election results, right? Like you have a district that wins, 60% Republican all the time. Well, what if there are outside factors for the reason for that? What if they just don't put up a good candidate every time, and you might have a competitive district if you had a competent, person challenging the incumbent. But a lot of times that's just not the case. And so, what would you do even if you built a district that you thought was 50-50, but then in the next election somebody won 60-40? What did you redraw the lines again because it's not quote unquote competitive? Like when you actually sit down, and this is really the question to you, is when you actually sit down and if you legitimately wanted to draw them in a way that was fair, whatever that means, how do you even start to do something like that? You don't just draw a big circle around Houston or, these like aesthetically pleasing geometrical shapes, and then say, okay, well, that's going to be what our districts look like. Like, how would you even start to do that?
Yeah, first of all, having a geographic, like that, I mean, just by population density variation, that's out the door immediately. Secondly, you know how people say like, oh, well, the one thing about the gerrymander is the shape of the districts. Have you ever seen some of the districts that are put together by like using like a computer to balance like that? Or God forbid, one of these, what they got in California, the map drawing commissions, which apparently I'm told is nonpartisan. Yet it's so weird that they still end up with a 30% Democrat advantage versus the presidential election. So weird how that happens.
Yeah,
anyway,
humans don't organize themselves into perfect circles and squares in a 50-50.
But let's take the dog for a walk. Let's say that you could, using a computer, draw the. Every district would have to look something like a radiating. Like basically a giant pie with the point of each pie going into the city centers.
That's right, yeah.
And if you thought you saw some weird things then, imagine what you're going to see with the outsides of those pies in order to balance out even trying to get a shared percentage of that city center.
Right.
And not only that, but then you're going to have just radical disparate districts in terms of race, right? Mm-hmm. Because then you're almost going to have nothing but... minorities, say, like in the collar counties around San Antonio, you're going to have some angle there too. But like you're going to be setting up more race and demographic problems pursuant to, and the whole Voting Rights Act thing is its own can of worms.
Right.
But you're setting up more problems that flies in the face of extant case law in the Voting Rights Act than you would had you just allowed a pure partisan gerrymander.
Yeah, it seems to me there's no clean, perfect way to do this that will satisfy everybody, and the way it's being done right now is the one that is the obviously makes the most sense, which is who's ever in charge draws the lines, and that's where
the maps always are out. And this is where I don't even know why we're even having a discussion of whether it's just justiciable or not. It's always a political question. Yeah. It is a first and foremost political question. The Republicans have addressed it as such, and the fact that one group tends to get their lunch eaten over this stuff doesn't change any of that.
Yeah, and of course, the obvious thing would happen is if the other team was in charge, Republican or Democrat, they would be doing exactly what the team in charge is doing right now. All right, so moving on from that, there are things that are happening in the legislature. Unfortunately, nothing can really get done because the House can't convene on the floor, at least, and can't vote. But there are some things happening. Want to cover some of those policy issues. The bathroom bill is back, although it does, it's more than that. It's just more than just a bathroom bill. But State Senator Mays Middleton, I believe this is from the Texan, our friends over at the Texan. State Senator Mays Middleton has filed Senate Bill 7, also known as the Texas Women's Privacy Act, which the press calls the bathroom bill. Was reintroduced for the first special session in the 89th legislature. It was taken up in committee this week. I believe it passed that. Did they have a vote yet to pass out of committee?
And I believe it passed out of the Senate.
The Senate committee, right? Yeah. Spurring hours of testimony.
I believe it was a Senate proper.
That revolved around nearly identical arguments as were presented in the 89th regular session. So that did get out. Again, what's interesting about this, though, is, of course, the debate is very much different than it was 4 or 5 years ago when it failed. Now we've gone through sort of the decline of the woke movement and and sort of they're losing ground on pushing the trans ideology and all of that. And so now the so-called bathroom bill, the Women's Privacy Act, has a much better shot at getting through the legislature in Texas, right?
Well, so it cleared the Senate. So it's over in the House, where again they can't conduct any business. But yeah, to your point though, we've seen the House traditionally be more reticent to engage in such social issues. However, I don't want to say it was a dam broken, but we definitely saw a change in tone when I think we had SB 14, right? Mm-hmm. Because when you saw the lengths to which the nays on that bill were willing to go in order to just justify allowing genital mutilation and poisoning of children, I think that was kind of a clarifying moment. And even Republicans who get a little squeamish on let's say the social stuff, were probably like, wow, that is actually a lot far. Now knowing where you're coming from, I'd take this. And then I don't think that any favors were done. If you watch the hearing at all, the individuals who get up there and just, shout at, I know, we've had Brian Hughes on here before. Mm-hmm. He's not exactly an aggressive, in-your-face kind of guy. Mm-hmm. But these people would go into these hearings and just curse a blue streak at him. And, of course, at the end, he'd just be like, well, thank you for your testimony.
That's right, yeah.
But I don't think they're doing themselves any favors by making themselves the face of the opposition to this. Mm-hmm. And I think that every time we have one of these hearings, the yard marker ticks a little bit.
Yeah, and
whether it's enough, we'll see.
And then what else has ticked the right direction is public support for these kinds of bills, especially because now that we've gone through kind of the overreaching of the woke movement, and now people really see it for what it is. Before it was seen as kind of mean-spirited and why is Texas doing something like this? To now it's like, no, we actually do need protected spaces for women. You've seen polling shift 60, 70 up to 80% of Texans now agree that biological men should not be in women's bathrooms and locker rooms and things like that. Nevertheless, and this is one of those issues that we like to point out, is the vast majority of people that show up for these hearings are opposed to the bill. And so it's just one of those issues where you might have 400 people show up and say that that this is that this is discriminatory or what have you, and only about 50 people who show up, and yet the public is very much behind this.
I will say though, that's actually one thing that did shock me about the committee hearing for SB 7. That was, I don't know what the final numbers were, but as far as folks who spoke on the microphone, that was about as balanced as I saw.
Okay.
Which I think is just a feather in the cap to the point you're making, is that this is an area where people have shifted. It's also been one where I think if you look at the engagement tactics on the other side, it used to be framed as, oh, you're trying to erase people or, do things like that. When the truth is, this is the response to, I would say, the aggressive campaigning for this particular cause. It's, subservient to the much larger woke agenda, as it were. Yeah. But for this particular cause, specifically,
the number one issue that they're working on for the special session is, of course, responding to the flood emergency that happened and the tragic loss of life. The House has had hearings, even though the House can't do anything on the floor. The House has had hearings and a number of different proposals. I think there's 5 different proposals, and what I read is that there may even be more coming. But they're geared on obviously providing funding, emergency funding for that area, which is critically important to have the cleanup. And I know you've been down there once and are continuing to organize folks to go down there and help, but also coming up with some kind of emergency warning system that may have helped, or something that would connect people in the area a lot faster. Any thoughts on kind of the proposals that are moving forward on reacting to the flood tragedy?
Yeah, I think what we've already seen is a good start. I mean, there's always going to be the temptation to, take as much money as, and I think, what was it that acting comptroller Hancock said? I think it was like a little over $3 billion sitting, between the couch cushions.
Wow.
That we can offer up on this. That isn't already earmarked in the budget going forward. But there's a lot you can do with $3 billion. Now, the important thing, and this is where I think people need to deliberately try to stay their passions, because we could just take all $3 billion and just plow it into the hill country and just hope everything works out. But that's not how this works. I do think that a substantial amount of this, and then let me kind of take a step back. I'll walk a little bit through the experience that we had when we went out there.
Yeah.
So there's a massive DPS checkpoint outside of Kerrville, and that gets backed up. And this, talk about problems to have, it gets backed up for miles. It takes an hour to get through. That's because there's that many people going out there to pitch in and help. We were helping out in Hunt, which is, in the more western side of Kerr County. So we got off 10 before we got, into the Kerrville part and kind of took the back roads, what's left of them. And that's where you really start to see some of the pronounced need for this. So the way we went in, we crossed a couple water crossings, one of which still had water over the roadway, but only 6 inches or so, nothing terrible. But what we saw time and again is you'd be driving along a road, and then you would have, cement stripes, marked lanes, guardrails, and then you would come down a corner and start going down, and everything would be gone. Like, there was ground, there was, surface dirt,
right?
But you'll just see the road stop, the guardrails are gone, the cement's gone, and basically you just see a path of destruction coming from your left or your right and continuing in the same direction. And that's where we really started seeing some of the trouble. Then on the way out, though, we headed eastward because it's easier to go back to 10 that way. And yeah, going through Hunt, it is not overselling it to say that it's not there anymore. Mm-hmm. Like this, I don't chuckle because it's funny. I'm at a loss for words. But it just, we saw things 40 feet up, like, mm-hmm. Things that ground-based objects 40 feet up into the trees. You saw cars that were, just thrown, far, far from the roads.
It looked like some kind of disaster movie or something.
Oh, yeah. And
you can believe it can do that.
And a tree, very thick trees by the river just snapped like toothpicks. I've never seen anything like it, and I've had experience in New Orleans post Katrina, mm-hmm. and I have not seen that level of destruction. Not only because of the flood in and of itself and all the displacement mm-hmm. that comes with that, but the sheer power that came with it has done things that I never thought I'd see. So,
do you think that that we're going to have to do several rounds of this? I mean, especially once you said once we get kind of the preliminary cleanup going and making sure that that's funded to try and get just trying to at least clean up the area. I wouldn't even say start developing again, right. But do you think they're going to learn things that say, and they're going to come back to the the legislature and say, hey, we need more help in this area, or we need more development here? Yeah, well,
I do think so, because I don't think I would go on record right now saying I don't think the full extent of the damage is yet understood.
Right.
I would say that, again, I'm not an advocate of public planning or that kind of stuff, but I would like to see a lot of those resources definitely go to infrastructure repair, because I think that is going to be the capacity limiter for when it comes time to do all the other stuff. Mm-hmm. I think that because we talked about this when we had Miss Tate on here. A warning system I think could help, but how interoperable it is, and again, if it's just something where people can have their phones turned off and that's it, that's not going to be adequate. But you also have to keep in mind the kind of sui generis nature of this particular event. We were talking to our colleague Rob Henneke, who grew up in that area. And he tells us, he goes, look, every building that washed away, it had not flooded there in past, right? Mm-hmm. If you're going to build something and it washed, and that's what would happen, is somebody would build something in a floodplain, it'd wash away, and that area was then never built in again.
Right.
So all the property that was destroyed is new flood area. Mm-hmm. And so you're basically trying to predict a black swan event when it comes to kind of the development side of this.
Right.
Now, on the other side is, had there been advanced warning, would the loss of life been mitigated? I think you can make a qualified answer that the answer would be yes, but how do you connect the, I mean, that's not all you need to do is pass this one thing and it's fixed.
Right.
That's a multi-step solution, some steps which require funding. And I think that's how they're going to have to go about that particular
And is there any discussion around sort of the regulation and the use of that areas? Because again, once things go back to normal, and it's going to be a long time before that happens, but assuming that things go back to normal and it's the Guadalupe River again, that was a place of obviously deep enjoyment for, generations of people who go to that area to enjoy the river, to camp and all of that. Do you think that there's a potential for overcorrection and not allowing people at all to go into those areas because of this, this black swan event?
So that's a tough one. My first answer would be yes. I do fear an overcorrection, as I do in almost every area of public policy. But I think that here again, if we kind of remember that again, this is all new flood area, and so you have to ask yourself, why were there places this close to the river? It was because, look, what are you going to do out there? I mean, that area is very hilly out there. It's called the hill country, before you get to the escarpment. And it's not really suitable for ag, but a lot of good forests, a lot of good water features. And so that is actually the natural. I mean, you can do some ranching out there, obviously, but that's the natural beauty is the selling point. There's a lot of camps out there because the property was cheap. I do fear that we might seek to overregulate or create some sort of civil law construct wherein it is prohibitive that these camps can't exist, that campgrounds can't exist, that the way of life that people enjoyed in the hill country prior to cannot exist. I do think that's a very real threat once the lawyers get their hands on it. But that being said, I actually trust the people of Texas. I trust the representatives from that area. Got to give kudos to freshman West Verdell. I mean, talk about a game time or a battlefield promotion to have to lead and be such a part of this recovery effort during your first session. I thought he's absolutely hit it out of the park. And so I think that I trust the people involved in the process. I trust the people that are affected by the process. I think we're going to get a good result of it. But yes, to answer your question, I do have those fears.
And that's really what the discussion is around the communication and warning systems, right? Is that if you do that right and they are effective, then the idea would be, yes, of course, you can continue to use those areas. You can continue to camp on them. And if something does happen like this again, or starts, or there are warning signs, heading that direction, that everybody who would be in that area enjoying the camp would be notified and would have the time to be able to get out before something bad happened. And so hopefully, if we're fixing the warning systems and the communication systems, then, the need for overregulation or for prohibition really would not be there. So
you definitely don't want to see that. Yeah. In the overcorrect side saying, oh, we got a 30% chance of a light rain, therefore clear out the whole valley.
You don't want that to happen. All right. Moving on to a couple other issues that are going through that are still moving through the legislature now, is the elimination of the STAAR test. This is actually a issue that unites the left and right. The question isn't should we get rid of the STAAR test, but what do we put in place? Because obviously the conservatives are not going to be in favor of no testing, right? There's got to be some way to measure and evaluate whether or how our kids are learning, or if they're learning, or where they are in their learning journey, I guess. But the STAAR exam, I think universally was seen as not sufficient, and so that's probably going to be eliminated. Where do you see this debate coming down in terms of what replaces the STAAR test as our tool for evaluating our kids?
Yeah, and you mentioned that it's a fairly bipartisan thing, and I don't think it's controversial to say so, because the STAAR test is widely unpopular, not because it is a measure of accountability, but because it's how we go about that accountability. The once a year high stakes test, you don't get the results till next year. It really only gets used to shame the districts, which, don't get me wrong, need shaming. But what does that give? Does that give you actionable intelligence to actually affect the learning trajectory, or especially a downward learning trajectory of a student who might not be doing so high.
And can you make the change when it would be the most effective?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So you're talking, you get an IEP in place, you're talking 18 months from when that kid sat down, and that might be a lag. That STAAR test might be a lag indicator of something else. So you might be at 2 years. Who knows? All that to say is, from discussions I've heard, is that the new proposal goes to a more a lower stakes, more periodic test that actually allows you to draw that through line, and with not instant, but with very robust feedback that comes quickly, as opposed to waiting to 1 year on.
I saw at least one district had posed the idea of creating their own test and coming up, having each district create its own evaluation system on how do you think that would shake out?
Here's the thing. I actually don't think that's a horrible idea. Now, remember, most of the legislation here calls for some sort of standardized norm reference test, right? And if all you did was create a test, and then just because you have to go through whenever you create a testing instrument of any type, you have to go through a process called validation. And if you only validate against the students in your district, that's not telling you anything, right? You could say, wow, everyone's doing really good. And then you look at the test and it goes, my crayons taste the most like blank. And it's a subjective open-ended question. And so...
Glad you use crayons and not glue.
Yeah, I was about to say, I got to give love to our Marines here. Shout out Celine. But all that to say is you can't internally validate a test. If they want to develop one and then validate it against external populations, I think that might actually show a path for Texas innovation on here. But that being said, is if they think they're going to create their own test just to satisfy the needs of this, and it doesn't have any sort of apples to apples where you can compare it against other districts, maybe even other states, I don't think that's going to fly.
And the proposal that I saw, they were calling them the pillars, the different pillars that they would evaluate. I mean, some of it had nothing to do with academics at all, and in fact had to do with community activity or things like that would go into the evaluation.
No for me,
all right, and then the other big issue that Texas just cannot get away from is, of course, property tax. SB 9 was passed out of the Senate, I think completely out of the Senate, which I won't bore people with the details, but it essentially runs or lowers the rollback rate from 3.5% to 2.5%, which, and if certain jurisdictions want to increase their revenue by more than 2.5%, they have to go and ask the voters on that. Again, this is something that's, there's a debate about whether or not having a voter election on these kinds of things is a productive tool for lowering the cost of government or for protecting taxpayers.
When they hold the election in June on a midnight and then on Sunday,
Right, yeah. Left-handed people vote on Monday, right-handed people vote on Tuesday. And whether or not that's an actual a structural bulwark against higher taxes. So at least it's something, and at least they're still trying to provide property tax relief. But here we are again talking about property tax. This isn't going to solve, as much as we support the idea, this isn't going to solve the property tax problems we have here in Texas, and so they will persist, as they say.
Yeah, and this is kind of the catch-22 with property taxes in general. Is you definitely have we've talked ourselves blue in the face on uniform election dates for bonds, and stuff like that. But when you do have taxpayer approved debt, even if one person's voting, that does put the imprimatur of democracy on it, right? That is. People like to complain, but they don't necessarily like to show up and do anything about it. And this
not showing up as a vote.
Exactly. and look, this isn't me victim blaming, because I think we can structurally address how this debt is taken on. I know for a tax increase, Governor Abbott was talking about having a 2/3 majority. I'd say that's a good start. I could go even higher than that. But that's the whole thing, is you're going to have people that are interested in this to do that. Now, the issue here, and I know talking about things we've talked ourselves blue in the face discussing, is the spending side, right? Because how many times just in our Teams chats, even today, have we said, oh, here's another district or another jurisdiction that's putting up a property tax increase, and they're saying there's no other way. There's no other. Have you thought about cutting spending? Like, have you ever countenanced maybe not having a COVID relief fund school resource officer that just made sure people's masks were on straight, and now you're parlaying that into a social work? Like, maybe you cut the position. This is the problem with the all the stimulus and government funding that came in externally, and because we said that it would happen, and lo and behold, it happened. That people were going to fund full-time positions with part-time or with temporary money, and they were going, and those will never go away. It all proves Ronald Reagan's, or was it Milton Friedman? I can't remember which. Those guys kind of converged anyway towards the end there. But there's nothing as permanent as a temporary government program. And now, since they lack the political will or the political courage to make that program go away or to make that money go away, now it's hitting the taxpayer.
Yeah, Reagan definitely stole his best economic lines from Milton Friedman. But you did hit the nail on the head, and this is something that you're looking at too. Is that all of these local governments are raising taxes, or saying that they have to raise taxes. They don't have another choice other than to increase funding, and then they say, because otherwise we won't be able to, and they use this term all the time, provide services. Like, we won't provide the level of services that we're providing now. But when you look at how the money's actually being spent, it's government employment. Right. It's just going to pay the people who are already there more, or hire people, or keep people on, like you said. And again, this is not like they're not buying, the vast majority of this money is not going to buy the materials, to construct new lanes in a road or whatever. It's simply, you look at this, it's just going to give people raises and salary increases, or to hire more people. It's just government jobs. That's what 75% of the money is going to. In the budget that I looked at was that 75% of the increase was just going to pay people to work for the government. And I guess there's a bank shot there where you say, well, if you want services, you got to have people to provide those services, and that's fair enough. But that's not really when they're communicating this to people. They're acting like oh, well, these services won't be there if we don't spend this new money. No, really, the new money is just going to pay more for the people who are providing the services, which is not really what they're trying to communicate when they're arguing for these things.
Well, sometimes, but because they also try to go, oh, you vote against this, you're getting your police cut, you're getting your fire cut, which of course is hilarious, because they would be the people that are making these determinations, determine what gets cut. I noticed that you didn't cut the third secretary in the mayor's office,
right?
But you're going to cut some police patrol. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But no, it's when the taxpayer is seen as a bottomless font of money. There's almost no incentive to be proper stewards of that. And that's why they keep getting themselves time after time after time into these positions where they don't want to turn the spigot down, even if the water pressure's starting to slow down, because they like the bucket as full as it is, because it keeps them from having to make unpopular decisions and maybe firing Ethel in accounting or something.
I do want to give a shout out. I think it was Keller ISD, it was reported this week, is actually doing some of that, where they're either cutting jobs, they're cutting, actual departments that they don't need anymore, or aren't producing, or aren't effective, and at least maybe they're cutting spending or not, but they're at least moving the money to something that is more productive, and making these kinds of tough decisions, which again, there are 1,250 school districts, so one doing the right thing is not going to change too much.
It's a start.
At least it's a start. You get to give kudos where they deserve. All right, so getting into our 10-minute drill, because we only have a few minutes here left. Wanted to get into our survey. Says, I thought this was a really interesting survey. This wasn't typical of just going out and polling the American people on what they think about border security or whatever. But there was a new Harris poll that surveyed children ages 8 to 12. This is more than 500 children that it surveyed across the United States. They offered unmistakable evidence, and this was talking about kids using phones and kind of like the experience of that age group right now. And the one thing that jumped out, of course, to the researchers was that we are in the smartphone age. The kids ages 8 to 12 are they either have a phone, or they want a phone, or they're using phones. They offered unmistakable evidence that this is the phone phone-based childhood is in full force. A majority reported having smartphones. A majority of kids 8 to 12 have smartphones, right? Not just the ones to be able to make sure that you can text mom when you're on your way home, but actual smartphones. And about half of the 10 to 12-year-olds said that most or all of their friends use social media. I guess we've talked about that ad nauseum about how social media affects kids. About 75% of kids ages 9 to 12 regularly play online games, but most children in the survey said that they aren't. This is what I thought was funny. Not funny, but interesting. 75% of kids ages 9 to 12 are playing online games. So they're going out into the world and playing games with other adults and other kids that are out there. But most of the children in the survey said that they're not allowed to be out in public without an adult. So they can go onto the internet where God knows what is out there, and who knows what is out there communicating with these children, and yet the parents won't let them go out in public without an adult. Fewer than half of 8 to 9-year-olds have gone down a grocery aisle alone. So you won't even allow your 8-year-old to run around the corner to grab the box of cereal they want, but you'll put them online to talk to God knows who. The grocery store aisle, more than a quarter aren't even allowed to play unsupervised, even in their own front yard. And so what this study showed is, what I thought was interesting, was that what the kids are longing for is unsupervised play. And so if you gave kids the option, they said, we asked them to pick their favorite way to spend time with friends. Unstructured play, such as shooting hoops, exploring the neighborhood, participating in activities organized by adults, such as Little League or doing ballet, or socializing online. There was a clear winner. Children want to meet up in person, no screens or supervision. And so the idea here is that what they want is unsupervised play. And so since they can't go out in their front yard, or they can't go down to the park without mom or dad, right behind them, they're going online. And that's, of course, even much more dangerous. And that's what this study says is, letting your kids going online where millions of people could have access to your kids and saying and communicating with them and God knows what. But they'll let them do that, but they won't let them go down to the park by themselves with their friends to play stickball.
Remember when we were kids and it was like, if I see you in the house before the street light comes on, you're grounded.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And
maybe things are different. I don't know, but
they're not. No, they're not. Well, are they? They are, but they shouldn't be.
Right.
There was that. We had Stranger Danger. With trademark back then too. But nowadays, if that is something you wear, like our 10-year-old, one of the things that we do, we slap a smartwatch on him and kick him out the front door, like during the summer. It's that, or you got to go to childcare. You know what I mean?
Right,
it's
right.
And
so at least there's some guardrail. You've got some protection that if they don't come back, at sundown, there's at least a way to, you've got some protection there. Where they are, where to find them, or they can communicate with you and text you or whatever.
Absolutely. The limiting factor there is just the Texas heat.
Right.
But there's another thing is, and then this is, you don't need to. This isn't going to cost you an arm and a leg. A lot of places around here, because we like to do everything's in HOAs and subdivisions and stuff like that. Most kids, and I will say most kids, have access to a pool, whether it's at a Y or at their neighborhood or whatever the case might be, and trade off with other parents taking the kids to the pool, and that's kind of. It seems like so simple, but like when I see it, I would never let my kids play Roblox. Which I know that in and of itself it tries to do a good job, but there's no redeeming value to it.
Right.
There is redeeming value to outdoor play. Now, I will push back on one of these because I think the grocery aisle one could be a little bit misleading. Have you ever been in line with your mom at the grocery store and she goes, "Oh, I just need to go get something," and then the line starts moving and she's not back yet? To this day have trauma about that. So that's probably something we want to ease kids in a little more. A little, because the grocery store is a harrowing event. Like what me at 10 years old is gonna have the money to buy that.
But the lesson is not that social media companies or online companies or whatever are addicting your kids to online games, and that's what's happening. These evil tech companies are trapping your kids online. The reality is that that's the only place place where kids can find quote unquote unsupervised play because parents won't let them go out into their own front yards or won't let them go and play by themselves at the park down the street, with their friends or whatever. And so really the parents got to look at themselves and say, if I don't want them playing video games all the time, how do I figure out a happy balance where they can have some unstructured play and even unsupervised play and still, feel safe that they're not going to get abducted or fall off a roof or something.
I don't know if it was in one of our chats here, but I did see somebody, like, it might have been Jonathan Haidt even wrote something like in defense of letting your kids get hurt or something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I was about to say, I think that our, sports careers, up through the age of, high school, we practically had an orthopedic surgery residency done because of, cut up knees and stuff like that.
So maybe it is, educating parents on that for sure. Because one of the pieces of the study also said that they asked parents, if you let your child go to the park unsupervised, what do you think would happen? 60% said they would get hurt, and 50% say they would get abducted. Which I don't mean to laugh about that, but like the idea that half of parents,
every other kid's getting abducted,
right? Or that half of parents think like that's what happens when you go, and then they go into a lot of statistics and show like how rare and how there's not like an epidemic of like random children. And I know I say that knowing that like we still see video of that, and there was actually one that just happened over the last couple of weeks where there was video of a child just getting randomly abducted. But again, the opportunity for that, or at least the likelihood of that, is so low compared to what actually happens.
You're more likely to get struck by lightning.
Yeah,
While at the park.
Or if you are worried about that and those things that are out there, the potential for that does scare you, at least try to structure it in a way where there's one parent to, taking, like you said, the group of kids are going out there and there's one parent there, or they have communication devices on them that aren't smartphones or that kind of thing. Maybe that's a way to get it done right. Okay. The last thing I'll say here, we got a couple minutes for our lies, damn lies, and statistics. I thought this was interesting. Plus it gives me a way to do our shameless promotion of our lawsuit. In its first century in existence, the city of Dallas from 1856 to 1961 passed an estimated 2,000 city ordinances. So 100 years, 2,000 city ordinances in the city of Dallas. Since then, since 1961, the city has passed approximately 33,000 city ordinances since 1961, and that doesn't count regulations issued by various city agencies. And so that brings me to our lawsuit, which is under the new Death Star bill that passed last session, which made illegal a lot of these city ordinances that now run afoul of state law because they go beyond what state law allows. And so we at Texas Public Policy Foundation have asked the city of Dallas we've identified, I think, over 130 city ordinances. Although it doesn't really seem like we've cracked the iceberg here with if there's 33,000 in the last 50 years or so. But we've looked at 130 different ordinances. We have said it's time to dismiss those ordinances or to not enforce them. And if you're continuing to enforce them, we will take you to court. That's crazy. 33,000 city ordinances after it had only done 2,000 in the first 100 years.
Now, I will give them some grace insofar as that it became a larger and more complex city that way. But that would explain a doubling maybe in that time.
Yeah, sure.
Or maybe even a tripling. We'll just to give them credit. But that being said, if you look at what is regulated by some of these municipal ordinances, and we're not even talking about the municipal codes like the building codes.
Right, yeah.
If you just look at that, it's like things that cities shouldn't be doing. If I had my druthers, the way I would do this is I'd make everything a mud, where you basically have, you can do like 9 things that it says you can do in the water code, and that's all you can do. But that's why nobody's voting for me for mayor probably.
Well, a lot of this stuff and a lot of these ordinances that happened in the last 5 to 7 years or so were a lot of these, if you use the wrong pronouns and things, if a business, if an employee at a business uses the wrong pronouns, there's a city ordinance that could get that person fined or fired or get the business in trouble. And so there's a lot of that going on.
Things that are not in the bounds of the municipality to regulate.
Exactly. All right. So we will watch watch that lawsuit. I think so far I don't even know if we filed the lawsuit. We've just said, hey, we're going to file this lawsuit unless you let the world know that you're not going to enforce these city ordinances that are now illegal.
Well, since we're in that wall with special session, maybe that's the next guest we can get Chance on here to just kind of walk us through the various lawsuits, because they got that one. They got the Chuck Wall lawsuit going on out west.
All right. Let's get super nerdy with Chance again, although we had a lot of fun with him last time. So, all right, what to watch for? Well, I guess other than whether or not the Democrats are going to come home and do the job that they were paid to do.
We're going to find that out at 1 p.m. today.
1 p.m. today. All right. Yep. Anything else on your radar that you're looking at between now and the end of the summer?
Well, no, that's basically it, because that determines when summer ends, I guess.
Yeah.
But what I'm going to watch for is, because we're part of, we're kind of in that nascent phase of gearing up for the 90th legislature. So I'm looking forward to, and we obviously, as you know, we're some ways off, but really seeing what the priorities that bubble to the top, not just for TPPF, but other organizations in this area. Because I think that with a lot of the success that we've seen in recent years, you're kind of getting into new and novel territory. So, what's addressing the big issues that are facing Texas, I think we'll start seeing that come into focus.
Yep. And I'm going to keep watching. I'm assuming that what it sounds like is that the Democrats are going to wait out this first special session. And then, of course, Greg Abbott, that's one thing that I think that the Nationals don't understand, is that, the governor can call as many special sessions as he wants to. And so, they're playing up like they're having this big fight. But in reality, once the special session ends, the governor can call the next one immediately. I'm interested to see if he adds anything to the call. Now, he can add anything to the call he wants any time, but that would be a moment to say, you know what? Not that it would be retribution, but it would be able to say, hey, maybe I left some things off the call last time that we need to get done.
I do think he should add some things, and I do think it should be retributive. I think what he should add is making quorum breaking and specifying it very clearly, make it a felony. Because what that would do is you wouldn't be able to have Pritzker out there stunting like that Illinois law enforcement are going to protect these runaway Democrats. He is already bound, like almost every other state in the union, to honor the Unified Uniform Criminal Expedition Act, which Texas has signed, which Illinois has signed, which every state, I think, except Florida and Hawaii have signed, but have different provisions in place. Basically, if we produce a valid warrant saying they have to get back here, they have to get back here, especially on a criminal subpoena. That we don't have that with these civil warrants. So I would just add that, and that would then stop being an issue.
And it should be said that the Democrats have turned this issue, the purpose of quorum, of course, they've turned it completely on its head. The purpose of quorum is to prevent a minority of members from ramming through legislation, right? Because there aren't enough people there, so a minority comes in and they, try to conduct business. The whole idea, but the Democrats, this is legislation that has a majority support. Even the redistricting and any of these other issues that has a majority of support. And so they are abusing the quorum rules in order to prevent legislation from passing that would pass if it was able to come to the floor with a majority support. So they've completely turned it on its head and are abusing it. So I think you're absolutely right. Anything that they can do legislatively to reform and to prevent quorum busting for these kinds of purposes would be a step in the right direction.
We make new felonies every single legislative session. Why not one more?
Yeah. All right. That's it for us. We've consumed exactly as much time as we need to. So we appreciate you all for listening. Derek, thanks for going through all the news.
You didn't mention school choice, though.
We didn't. No, we talked about STAAR test. I thought that would cover it. I mean, we passed school choice, you know? Like, I guess we'll
So are we free or are we discharged from a contract?
No, I'll have to check with our boss on that. All right. Well, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And as always, in the immortal words of Sam Houston, do good and risk the consequences. We'll see you next time.